Hey guys, welcome to PB Garage. Today we're going to have a look at replacing the alternator, serpentine belt tensioner, and serpentine belt on a Smart 451. This is a North American Brabus edition with the 1 liter naturally aspirated Mitsubishi motor that's in all of the Smart 451s in North America. So basically what we're going to look at, this is a common failure point with these cars. The alternator being on the motor, which is at the back, is exposed to a lot of dirt and gunk and stuff, and it's common for them to get clogged up and just stop working. Some of the signs that will tell you that you have a bad alternator, and a lot of these, like I say, go bad, is first of all, the battery light on the dash will come on. So if you're driving along and that light comes on, you know that the car isn't charging properly. However, I do want to point out that isn't super reliable in these cars, so a lot of times you can be driving and not charging properly if the alternator's failed, and the light won't actually come on until the voltage on the battery gets really low. So sometimes, you could be driving, the light will be off, indicating that everything's working properly, but then when you go to start the car, trouble starting. I've also seen a lot of times the car will start having trouble shifting because it needs a lot of power for the electronic clutch actuator. So what happens when the charge gets low or the charging system isn't doing very well, the car will have trouble selecting gears, and a lot of people go ahead and replace the clutch actuator when in fact the problem's not with the clutch actuator, the problem's with the alternator. So to avoid that, the first thing you want to do to check to make sure that the problem that you're having with the car is the alternator is just to check the voltage while it's running. So to do that, you can even do it just from the cigarette lighter, use your voltmeter, check the voltage while the car's running. It should be at least high 13s, low 14s in terms of voltage with the car running. And if that's the case, then the charging system's okay. Sometimes, these cars are getting to be a little bit older. Sometimes the factory batteries are still in them, and those can go bad, so check that as well if you're having issues with the car starting. If you know that you have a good battery and your charging voltage is okay and you're having issues with shifting and stuff like that, then you know that it's another problem. But for now, let's have a look at the alternator and how to replace it. We're going to start by trying to remove the tensioner, but I've got this fancy tool that I've made. It's made out of a wrench welded to another wrench with a piece of a Allen key welded into the end of it. Fits into a little recess in the tensioner here. It's a very tight space, so it's difficult to get into. That's why I made the special tool. But as soon as I tried to relieve the tension from the belt, I realized that, in fact, that tensioner was totally seized, so I decided to remove it completely. So just pull out the one bolt that holds it on. That's an E-Torx bolt, which is the case for many of the bolts on this car, so if you don't have a set of those, you're going to need it. Then just a quick smack with a hammer, off comes the tensioner. And you can see it's pretty corroded, very old. Needs to be replaced. So we're going to pitch that guy. Now you can see the belt's loose, so I'm just going to slip that off the alternator pulley and remove the belt. Serpentine belt, surprisingly, actually in pretty good condition, but it's going to be replaced with a new one anyways because we're in there and might as well do it now. Next step, we're going to just move this little solenoid out of the way so that we can access the bolts for the motor mount on this side of the car. Now the reason we remove this motor mount, you can see I'm grabbing the 2 bolts off the little subframe there, and then there's 3 bolts holding it to the engine block. And the reason I'm removing it is to be able to access the bolts that hold the alternator in. Now you want to make sure obviously that your engine is supported while you go to remove this motor mount. If you don't, that side of the motor is going to fall down, so make sure you have it supported under the car with a jack. Pull those 3 bolts out of the block, and then your motor mount will just slip right out. There's the motor mount out. Now with that out of the way, I have access to remove the 2 bolts that are holding the alternator in. Now these guys are quite tight. This car's obviously seen a lot of winters and a lot of road salt and things like that, so everything's fairly corroded. Now with those 2 bolts removed, we can go ahead and remove the alternator completely from the motor. Took me a bit of time to get it off because the one side of the alternator there where it's attached to the bracket was very tight because somebody had torqued the bolt way down, or maybe that was from a factory. Once we get that alternator loose, I've unhooked my couple of wires off the back. There's one plastic plug that you need to undo, and then the power wire that's on that stud with the nut that you can see here. Now if we look at the old alternator, it's easy to see why this thing failed. It probably got all this gunk on the cooling fins for the rectifier there, and then the rectifier probably fried itself, overheated and fried. Now we can go ahead and put the new one in. And first we're going to do up our electrical connection. So I've plugged that plastic plug in, and now I'm putting on our power cable with the little nut. Now I can mount the alternator to that bracket, slide the bolt in, and then slide the other bolt in and tighten both of them up. Now we can replace the tensioner. You can see the new one obviously in much better condition than the old tensioner here. Much less corroded. Now you see we have that little pin that's keeping it loaded in the basically the loose belt configuration. So we're going to have to take that pin out before we apply the tension to the Serpentine belt once it's installed. Now pay attention to this little locating nub and make sure that fits into the hole on the block, and then we can do that bolt up. Hold the tensioner in properly. And now we're going to grab our special tool again. But before we do that, we're going to actually loosely mount the belt. And then using our little tool, if I can get it in the hole, using our tool, we're going to relieve the tension on the Serpentine belt tensioner, remove that little locking pin. Now with that pin out, I can finish putting the belt on, slide it up over the alternator pulley, and then release the tensioner and let the belt get tightened up. Now that we have that belt on properly on the alternator pulley, you can release that, and we're done. That's all it took. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos on this Brabus 451 that I'm restoring and kind of going to be modding a little bit, subscribe to the channel. Have a look at our playlists. I have a playlist with all of the Brabus videos, so there's going to be hopefully a bunch more technical information there for everybody that's not specific to the Brabus, but if you are interested in following this project in particular, make sure you go check that out, and have a good one. Thank you very much.